My father died a hero in our town. At least that's how everyone described him. He was the man people called when their roof leaked in the middle of winter. The one who showed up when someone's car broke down on the highway. The one who fixed problems quietly without ever sending a bill. For 40 years, he built a reputation as the most dependable man anyone knew. At the funeral, people told the same stories over and over again. How he rebuilt Mrs. Henderson's porch after a storm. How he spent an entire weekend repairing the church basement plumbing. How he once drove 2 hours in the middle of the night just to help a neighbor's daughter move out of an unsafe apartment. They said he never asked for anything in return. They called him generous. They called him loyal. Some even called him a saint, and as I stood there listening to the speeches, I wanted to believe them. But inside my coat pocket was a small brass key, and that key was quietly destroying everything I thought I knew about him. 2 days before the funeral, I opened the safe deposit box he had left only for me. Inside, I expected the usual things people leave behind. A will, insurance papers, important documents. Instead, I found a stack of letters. Dozens of them, each one carefully folded. Each one addressed to a woman whose name I had never heard before. Alongside the letters was the key. Attached to it was a small tag with a handwritten address in a city 3 hours away. A city my father had always claimed he had never visited. At first, I assumed the obvious. A second life. A mistress. Another family. It felt like the kind of secret you only see in movies. But the deeper I looked, the stranger the story became. Because my father was not the kind of man anyone suspected of deception. In fact, the more people praised his honesty, the heavier that key felt in my pocket. The funeral was packed. People filled every row of the church. Some stood along the walls because there were no seats left. My mother sat in the front row holding a tissue with trembling hands. She looked like someone who had just lost the center of her world. And in a way, she had. She was grieving the man she thought she knew. But as I watched her from across the aisle, I realized something unsettling. I was grieving someone else entirely, because the man in those letters was not the same man everyone was praising. And somewhere, 3 hours away, there was a truth waiting behind a locked door. There's a pattern I've noticed in human stories. The brighter someone's public image becomes, the darker the shadow it casts behind them. People who seem perfectly generous sometimes carry invisible debts. People who appear endlessly kind are sometimes running from something they cannot face. In psychology, there's a concept called compensatory altruism. It describes a pattern where someone becomes excessively helpful or generous to compensate for guilt they carry privately. In simple terms, they perform goodness to balance something they believe they've done wrong. The idea haunted me during the entire funeral, because suddenly my father's kindness didn't look as simple as it once had. Maybe he wasn't just helping others. Maybe he was paying something back, but I wouldn't know for sure until I followed the address. So 3 days after we buried him, I got in my car and started driving. The highway stretched out ahead of me in quiet gray lines. 3 hours gives a person a lot of time to imagine possibilities. An apartment hidden from our family. A woman who knew him by another name. Children who had never met us. By the time I reached the city, I had built 100 different explanations in my mind. None of them were right. The address led me to a quiet building on the edge of town. It wasn't an apartment complex. It wasn't a house. It was a hospice center. The sign outside read, Riverside Hospice Care. I sat in the car for nearly 10 minutes before going inside. The building smelled like antiseptic and warm tea. A nurse at the desk asked if I needed help. I gave her the name from the letters. She nodded slowly. She's still here, the nurse said. Room 12? Room 12? I walked down the hallway feeling like I was stepping into someone else's story. When I opened the door, I saw a woman lying in a hospital bed. She looked older than my mother, but there was something about her face that stopped me in my tracks. The resemblance was uncanny. She had the same shape of eyes, the same narrow chin, the same tired strength in her expression. It looked like my mother, if my mother had spent 20 years fighting a war. She turned her head slightly when I entered. For a moment, she studied me with curiosity. Then she smiled faintly. You must be one of his, she said. Her voice was thin but steady. I hadn't said a word. How did you know? I asked. She gave a small laugh. You have his eyes, she said. Then she said something that made the entire world tilt. She called him by a different name, not the name everyone in my town knew. Another name entirely. That's when the truth finally began to unravel. The woman wasn't his secret lover. She was my father's sister-in-law. Decades earlier, my uncle had died unexpectedly. He left behind a wife and a young child. But there was a complication. My mother had never trusted that side of the family. Old arguments, old grudges, old jealousies. My father knew that if he tried to support them openly, it would ignite a war inside our own home. So he made a decision, a terrible one. He chose silence. For 30 years he sent money, paid medical bills, covered school expenses, quietly supported the family his brother had left behind. All without telling anyone, not his friends, not his neighbors, not even his wife. He created a second life made entirely of responsibility, and he carried it alone. This kind of behavior has a name too. Psychologists call it pathological secrecy. It happens when someone becomes so convinced that the truth will destroy everything that they build an entire life around hiding it. They isolate themselves. They carry burdens alone. They believe secrecy is protection. But secrets don't disappear. They just grow heavier. Eventually, the weight becomes unbearable. My father carried 2 families on his shoulders for decades. 2 worlds that could never collide. 2 truths that could never exist in the same room. And in the end, that pressure stopped his heart. The woman in the hospice bed looked at me with quiet understanding. He was a good man, she said softly. Yes, I replied. But he was also a very lonely one. I sat beside her for nearly an hour. She told me stories about the sacrifices he had made. How he had never missed a payment. How he visited whenever he could. How he insisted that no one from our town should ever know. When I left the hospice that evening, the sun was already setting, and I realized something that frightened me. My father had passed the burden to me. The letters were proof. The key was proof. Now I knew the truth. And knowing it came with a choice, I could tell my mother. Expose the secret. Destroy the memory of the man she had loved for 40 years. Or I could keep the secret alive. Protect the image he had built. Protect the peace he had tried to maintain. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with the letters spread across the table. Each one was written in my father's careful handwriting. Each one carried the weight of 30 years of hidden responsibility. I stared at them for a long time. Then I made my decision. I burned them, one by one. The fire consumed the evidence of the second life he had lived. The truth disappeared into ash, because sometimes the most complicated question isn't whether something is true. It's whether the truth actually helps anyone. My father was not the saint people believed he was. But he wasn't a villain either. He was just a man who tried to protect 2 families at once, and in the end, he protected them so well that he isolated himself completely. That was the real tragedy. Not the secret, but the silence. The silence that followed him for 40 years. If there is a lesson buried beneath this story, it's this. The secrets we keep to protect others often end up isolating us the most. And when someone you love leaves a secret behind, you have to ask yourself one difficult question. Does the truth serve the living, or does it only satisfy the curious? Because sometimes the most compassionate choice isn't exposing the truth. Sometimes it's allowing a complicated life to remain at peace. Now I'm curious what you would have done. If you discovered a secret like this after someone you loved passed away, would you tell the truth? Or would you let the story end the way everyone believes it did? Let's go beneath the story in the comments.